Welcome to the Podcast Editors Mastermind Show. I am Steve. I read sign language Stewart. That's S-I-N-E. Haha. And I'm here with my co-host, Mark Deal.
Hey, let's make a deal.
Excellent branding there. We are here with Matthew Bliss, who's going to be our special guest to talk about red flags today. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks for having me. I live here in blissful ignorance, but hopefully not.
Matthew Bliss is an Australian podcast engineer, producer, and educator who relocated from Australia to Ireland. So, Mark, we've got both of my favorite accents in one today. He is founder of mbpod.com, where he offers comprehensive production consultation and training services to indie and business podcasters. That's going to come in as a topic of discussion for me later. As he hosts and co-hosts a few shows himself, he's also got a big background working in the IT classroom support and digital technologies curriculum support. That's a long title. In schools, and as a trainer, digital workplace expert in learning development. I feel like I'm reading something because I am. It's a long bio. He's got the skills and worked with state government as well, haven't you, Matt?
I have. And look, what you're reading there, peek behind the curtain. You guys asked me for a bio, and I feel like I need to capture my background, but it is so super weird, diverse, and has not, directly led to podcasting that I feel like I have to be as concise and specific with it as possible. So, IT support in schools, curriculum support. I don't think I even put in there. Trained secondary teacher, IT trainer in government, and then the pandemic happened in Melbourne. And I became literally anything to do with IT for a 5,000 plus person dispersed government department. So it was interesting times.
I find it interesting that we've had 3 teachers or ex-teachers on this show for in the last few weeks. It's like a common denominator or something. We need to do our long division based on that.
We're great at talking. We are excellent at talking.
Or maybe we, Steve, you and I, we gravitate towards educators, since that's what we do, is we educate engineers and editors, and we have an editor-engineer who's also an educator. So this is just a great mix of skills.
Yeah. A while ago, Mark brought up the fact that we keep hearing this thing about red flags, and it's funny, around the time he said that, Matthew, you posted that you did an episode on your podcast about red flags with a client that you had. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what red flags are? What do you call a red flag? Because I know I'm in Colorado. We have wildfire restrictions, and they say red flag warning, no fires. That's a little bit different, I think, than what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, in Australia, when you see a red flag, it's usually yellow as well, and you have to swim between them to avoid rips. But in podcasting, at least, usually when you're talking about a red flag, you have experienced or heard of an experience that raises that flag, telling you that something bad or untoward or unconstructive is happening within your podcasting business for the context of people who'll be listening to this episode. So that could be you're not getting paid enough, or an invoice comes in that was less than the agreed price, and you look at it and go, okay, red flag, I haven't been paid enough money there. How do I approach this? And seeing the red flag, I think that the reason that we call them that is because it indicates something to you, but it doesn't come with a resolution. Like, there are a lot of different ways that you can approach these things. So red flag indicates the problem. The solution to whatever that problem is, who knows? And in podcast editing, there's no grand standard to look at for every context that any editor could possibly be in. So it's a hot button issue. It's something that a lot of people experience, and at the very least, the thing we have in common is to call it a red flag.
Yeah, I typically see red flags as kind of a leading indicator of perceived risk, as you were saying, Matthew. And I say perceived risk because maybe it really is risk, maybe it's not, but I choose to listen to my gut. And if my gut's telling me something is off, I ask it, what do you think is off, and what is that risk? And if it, sometimes I get into this whole fear echo in my own head of this possible red flag or possible risk, oh, does this mean this? Does this mean that? So sometimes I'll try to bound myself with that. But that being said, I'll listen to my gut, and some red flags I'll jump ahead of, but not to jump ahead of this episode. So let's start talking about red flags.
Well, first of all, probably it would be a good idea, since you mentioned it, that the original post that I put together for that episode that I released, the context for that was that I'm still kind of loosely attached, but at the time had a client who was a not-for-profit in Australia who I'd been working for a very long time, had let's say, a less than full understanding of what podcasting involved. So when I was brought on board, it was a time when they were just like, we need podcast things happen. We need someone professional to do podcast things. Can you do them? And I was like, yeah, sounds like a great opportunity. It was just before I left Australia to come to Ireland. So I was thinking, okay, it's a paid gig, not a well-paid gig, but it's paid, so it can supplement me until I get a job over here. And working for a not-for-profit, I think a lot of people have opinions about working for them to begin with. They don't start corporate private level. They don't have big pots of money to play with, so they'll generally prefer volunteers to do that work. Generally, they'll ask people to volunteer their expertise in a space. But the additional problem that I had with this was that it was a small but rapidly growing group. It was very ambitious, and the growth far exceeded the ability for the people on board to maintain it. Not only that, there was very poor communication between all of the remotely dispersed team members who were a part of this not-for-profit. Not only that, it was also funded by grants, which fueled the development of podcasts, but unfortunately the ambition of people in the leadership of this organization meant that the podcasts would get done regardless of grant funding, which means that people who would be paid don't stay if they're not paid. And if they're not getting paid, why should they stay? Which we would say as podcast editors. And because the stuff doesn't get done, it still gets driven because it's been promised. And then the work starts to pile up a little bit until it gets to a point where it gets a bit silly. Now, the post that I made and the episode I recorded on Coffee with a Podcaster was me coming out the other side of trying to set up a workflow and a bunch of processes to make it rigid. If you've ever worked in a government organization, private organization with a team, you know that you probably want to have some sort of asynchronous communication, like a Slack, Teams, something, regular meetings to keep people updated, project updates to keep people abreast of what progress is being made, strong communication between team members who are a part of that workflow to get the work done. All of which was not happening. It fell on my back to try and make it happen. And by the time I made this post, the not-for-profit had severely run out of money. It was the people who were making the decisions weren't willing to come to the table to change their approach to promising new podcasts. They weren't willing to change or adjust their workflow to support the people who were actually getting the work done for them to make it easier. They made no effort to learn about the podcasting platforms themselves, the way that the recording process is done, and any kind of feedback that I tried to give them, they got really defensive and just didn't action any of it. So that episode was recorded in frustration. All those red flags I listed, I think it was a very concise paragraph of, and hey, haven't been paid for a few months, and they're not willing to pay, and can't communicate, and not willing to take feedback. How many red flags can you count?
So Matthew, let me ask you, after you did that episode, after you did that post, after essentially you vented your frustration at these red flags, how did it make you feel?
Look, some of the responses I got from people were really interesting. A lot of them were in support of what I was saying. In reality, a lot of what I do, I want to be able to share with the podcasting community. So I wanted to share that experience in a way that was constructive and in all the ways that I just explained it, that it's not just me complaining to the void and saying, oh, this is terrible. Like there's a lesson to be had from it. So I felt good
Definitely.
in that the content is there.
Yeah,
you know?
definitely. And we appreciate you sharing it. And that's why I was asking, how did that make you feel? But I'm assuming based off what you were saying that it made you feel good to kind of vet that out, maybe for yourself or just, I guess, for the education of others, since you're an editor, engineer, and educator. Is that
It should be made clear that it didn't have an impact on my relationship with that client. I'm still in the process months later of offboarding myself from their process. Okay. Yeah.
Well, it turns out, Matthew, you are not alone when it comes to red flags. I did a quick search for red flags in the Podcast Editors Club, and oh boy, have I seen lots of posts over the years. Obviously, yours was very well thought out, and it had a good developing story, as you briefly shared with us earlier at the top of the show. But if I may, can I share some of these red flags from the Podcast Editors Club, and maybe we could talk about the red flag, maybe how it made them feel. I'd also like to talk about what is the risk. Is there a real risk? And then maybe mitigation strategies. Does that sound good to everybody?
Let's do it.
That's why I'm here. I'm here to hear it.
That's why Steve is here.
I want to hear all this.
All right. The first one is from Angelina. Angelina says, any potential client that gets on a call with you and complains about how many editors they've worked with who are so incompetent and just couldn't get it right is most certainly a red flag. Run away! Either of you felt something like that or seen something like that where they're constantly complaining about other editors or maybe other people, colleagues, coworkers, or peers they've worked with?
I've been really fortunate in that a lot of my clients come by referral, which I guess in this context implies a social relationship in addition to a professional one, which kind of protects me from some of this flexing. But I have seen stories like that, and it's the Fiverr and the Upwork of things, right? Like, I can go down the street and get one for half price. Why should I stay with you? Kind of implied. That would be a huge red flag for me.
Yeah. I've seen some where it wasn't necessarily regarding the editing project or the production project. It was with regard to other team members that had been there for a long period of time, some short period, some long period of time. And essentially the, clients complaining about some of their peers and coworkers and it really seemed the way they were complaining, they didn't understand what those coworkers did, but they were just going to make their lives horrible because of it. And I was thinking to myself, gosh, is that going to happen to me too? If you don't understand exactly what I'm doing here. Well, how about you, Steve?
I'm really glad we're having this episode because I was thinking, okay, what red flags have I experienced or can I remember? I can only think of one, but now that you read Angelina's post and we commented on it, I'm like, wait a minute. I did have a client one time who came to me and he said the previous editor wasn't doing a very great job. And I thought, oh, he's coming to me because I'm an expert in his niche. Come to find out later, he's just a difficult client. That would have been a red flag had I thought about it. So thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Mark, for bringing up this topic because I think I'm going to take a lot away from it.
Thank you, Steve. And you kind of segued into what is that risk. And it is, they're going to be difficult clients to work with. Not just so much, Matthew, as you were saying, the production workflow, setting up processes, but maybe these are people that are going to require 1, 2, 5, 15 back and forth emails on what's really a simple subject and should be a non-issue, creating more overhead workload for you and thereby limiting the amount of other work that you can do. But what's a possible mitigation strategy that we could all use as editors, producers, directors, engineers, if we hear a client or potential client kind of complain about the incompetence of other editors or engineers or peers or marketers?
Marketers as well, yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's about the onboarding process. That's a really important part of getting any kind of client. I think that's a fear for a lot of us. Like, we take any and all comers because we don't know when the next one's going to come. So that might, fall into some red flags about pricing that you might have squirreled away there, Mark. But the onboarding, the question time, the interview, seeking behind the curtain, like in your case, Steve, where they're trying to give you the big ups, like, I know you're better than this person. And they kind of, squeezing something behind you there that's, less than toward. So maybe asking the right questions, getting something in place that to ask them maybe getting an exposure to what their previous workflow was like with their other editor, knowing the applications they use might be a good way to get an eye over their process, or maybe even do a probationary period with them to figure out whether you're a good fit with them as well as whether they're a good fit with you.
How about you, Steve? Any ideas?
I think my answer, honestly, would be run away, run away, run away. But that's not a very good answer. I think going one step
if you run away from every opportunity, sure, you'll certainly be safe until you can't afford to pay your rent or mortgage and everything. No,
exactly.
But that's a good point. Yeah, eventually, Steve, let's talk about it now, because this may come up in several other red flags. Is if your gut is really clinching due to a red flag, it's probably best not to try to work it out, just to run away. That being said, I think on this particular issue, I have found a very strong correlation between people that complain about the incompetence of others and not really understanding the incompetence of themselves. And what I mean by that is I'll ask them, the two simple questions that I believe every freelancer should ask their potential clients is, what is your goal and what's your budget? And I found a lot of times that people that don't really understand their goal or really understand their budget don't really understand themselves and what they want. And then they have like this almost their own unquantifiable reaction to everyone else. And, oh, they're incompetent because they can't read my mind. I'm like, well, you're right. I can't read your mind. So that's one thing, is ask them like, hey, what, high level in one sentence, what's your goal? Maybe 2 or 3 sentences. But if they can't even state their goal, then it's going to be hard to, I think, really service them. Anyway, that's what I found. A strong correlation. People who can't enunciate their goals and thereby point the finger at others.
I'm having difficulty with that right now. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody who I talked to about 2 weeks ago who said they want to start this show. It's not in my niche, but they wanted help getting started, which I can definitely do, and I do offer that service. And I keep getting these feelings that they don't quite know what they want, but I've asked the questions and they've answered them all properly. This is what they want, but I haven't found an ROI in there other than we want to reach out and, reach our community and reach people. And there's that always worries me.
That's like the high level, right? But you need a little bit closer to what the podcast is doing to serve that. Yeah.
I think, because I've worked on shows that don't necessarily have an ROI, but there is a quantifiable metric, right? So they'll have a leading indicator that's something else that isn't a direct return on investment ROI, but it's something else that is a leading indicator of something. In fact, I know of other big podcast production studios, their best clients don't measure ROI. They are basically deepening connections among their own list. In fact, they have a term for that. If I use that term, it'll probably alert you to who this person is. But anyway, they found that, people that are looking at that goal, which is quantifiable but not direct to ROI, they've got the tools to help. All right, let's move on, because we've got lots of red flags, because this is a topic that keeps coming up inside the Podcast Editors Club. Excited to talk about here on the Podcast Editor Mastermind show. A lot of these are posted anonymously. And I think people post their red flags anonymously because they feel bad. Like, is this me or is it them? Is it, is the problem me? Is it you or is it me? So this is one of many anonymous posts. I'm beginning to think I'm starting to be too picky with the clients I work with. I've had long-term clients. So this is the beginning. I've had long-term clients, but some change and have started showing red flags. Yet I still think I'm becoming more selective and nitpicking clients to work with. So this is kind of like Angelina's comment, but this is more not so much potential clients, but they're long-term clients. They're starting to show red flags. Either of you seen that with long-term clients starting to show red flags?
I will refer you to my story at the beginning of the show.
Fair enough. Asked and answered earlier in the show. How about you, Steve? And also keep in mind that one of your long-term clients is on the show right now. So
yes, but no red flags there. Fortunately,
okay.
He's just
a red
shirt. Yeah. Yes, I've actually had that before. We'll work together for 6 months and then things start to happen. Or I've got another client where I've been working with the whole team for years, but then they've changed things. Now some of the people are doing their own shows under that umbrella, and we're getting episodes late. and all this normal stuff. How do you avoid that? I don't know. I mean, that's something that if you didn't figure that out before you start working with them, how do you get out of it? Unless it's, and this is going to be another answer to a lot of these problems. What's in the contract? And I didn't have a contract with them back then. So now I'm stuck.
Yeah. I've had a similar situation pop up in the past where, long-term clients, and I guess the red flag there was I was getting less and less communication from them. It turns out they were, traveling a bit more because now the pandemic is over and people are out and traveling and going places to places and meeting, face-to-face, people-to-people type thing. So maybe the show was taking a little bit of a back seat. That being said, they start talking with other people or have different other ideas and their business evolves, yet I'm kind of left out of that thinking. And then they show up with different ideas than what was done in the past. And I've, as you were saying, Steve, point to the contract, like, well, here's what we've done and for the last few years and we'll continue to do, what is it that you want change? And essentially for me, we had to hop on a call. That being said, I think in the future, and this is something that I think that podcast editors, engineers, producers, managers, showrunners can do, is build in a client call that's not about recording a show or producing a show, but just touching base with the client, once a month or once a quarter. I think maybe once a quarter is probably enough. Once a month gets a little repetitive. But that way you can kind of get ahead of those things. Otherwise it's, hey, I'm waiting for audio files. And if things start to derail, you don't know until they start getting frustrated or showing those red flags. So yeah, for me, it requires a lot of, and the risk was a lot of back and forth in emails. Like, no, I don't do that. I've never done that. And this is what we've agreed on. And this is what I'll continue to do. I'm like, oh, well, things have changed for us. Like, okay, great. But anyway, so we hopped on a call and did a little course correction there. All right.
I love that suggestion.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these, as I'm reading them, I'm like, oh, I've been there. The last one I think that we can kind of really dive into. Is it a red flag if a possible client is ignoring my messages for him to sign a contract? For me, the answer is yes, but I would love to hear everyone's answer.
3 letters, YES. I don't think there's any other thing you can do. I mean, you push for the contract, but if they're not ready or if they're unwilling, you can't start.
Yep.
So
and you're not going to do work unless the contract is signed because there's no agreed terms. So why would you proceed?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think in this case, obviously it is a red flag. I think the risk there is you're going to end up going down a path like what we were talking about the last one of long-term clients turning into, starting to develop red flags. So point to the contract to what you're saying, Steve. So this one definitely signed the contract.
And I can say from a guy who always gives a little bit of extra grace to every situation, to every person, I would be the one where they'd start sending me stuff and I'd be looking at it and I'd probably run some processes on it and stuff like that. But at that point where you haven't gotten the contract or you haven't got the communication from them on, if it's just not following through, I have given myself an excuse not to do the work and not to proceed. I like giving myself excuses for not doing work. Well, that doesn't sound good. Take that out, Steve.
It's a good thing. It's a really important thing, I think, because there's full end zone with people I've had. They've contacted me, said, hey, let's organize a meeting. Are you available for this time? Oh, here's a bit of work. Can you tell me what you do to this audio? And then crickets, like they just completely ghost. Seeking an excuse not to do the work is more of a reason than an excuse. And innately, because of the kind of clawing up we feel like we have to do up the ladder as podcast editors in an industry that's largely unregulated, we feel like we have to prove more than we're deserving of. So, fully justified, Steve. I'm totally with you.
I just don't like the word excuse. I'd rather use reason, which you said. So,
yeah.
I have a reason not to do the work because we haven't come to an agreement yet. Where's the contract?
Yeah, it's really semantics, but I think we all agree these are red flags. They do come with risk. For each of these, we're talking about what the risk is and with mitigation strategies on how to get around it. And as you both say, don't do the work until the contract is signed. For me, in the contract signing system I use, after that is done and approved and signed by all parties, then I turn on essentially the workflow. So if they're asking me like, hey, are you going to be available for, our show that we're doing on Tuesday, or I've got files, ready, like, hey, I refer you to early. We don't have a contract signed yet. So there's really no way for you to give me the files. They're not going to be emailing me audio. I hope not.
Yeah,
all right. So let's get into the rapid fire.
Red flag.
Yeah. Let's get into the red flag, rapid fire red flags. So with potential clients asking, hey, what kind of turnaround would you like with the episodes? The potential client says, ASAP is usually my deadline.
How do you say paradox in podcasting? Yeah, no, let's pick a date. Let's get a time frame in there.
I've seen that as well when they think they're the only client and whatever problems they've had is my problems, but then their urgency is my urgency. So then I don't really feel like a team member, and that's what I bring up when they're like, oh, we want to work with you, or we have worked with you for a while. It's like, yeah, well, let's share the risk, share the reward.
Hold on. If the deadline is ASAP, but we've got some kind of a rush fee option in our contract, well, then it takes care of it. But in my rush fee option contract, they got two options to choose from. If they need it before the 3 business days, which is typical for me, they can choose one of two things. But then I also say, but it doesn't guarantee that I'll have it done in 3 days. So I'm already giving myself a reason to not get it done. If they say, yes, Steve, we want it ASAP, I'll say, okay, it'll be this cost or this cost. But if I can't get it done in 3 days, it just doesn't get done in 3 days. And of course, then they don't get charged the rush fee option.
I've had, talking about rush fees, I've had some, same thing, they pay for it and they forget to add the rush fee option. And then I'll get lengthy emails from multiple people like why it needs to be rush. And I point out, well, it wasn't paid for as rush, but here's the process in which to do it. And of course, the more lengthy emails from many, many people in the team, Vice just, hey, click on the link, do the thing, and I'll do the thing. Yeah. And this kind of leads into the next, what I hope was going to be rapid fire red flags, but I can tell we're all passionate about all these. Can you lower the cost? I can give more work.
Is that even a red flag? I don't think that counts. It's a temporal issue. People aren't figuring out that time scales with work as opposed to with less money.
I have a solution for that.
Yeah.
And it's not run away. Because if you're already working with them, obviously, then you're not just running away. You got to figure out the solution. When they change the agreement, then we can revise the agreement, and then maybe we can find some ways to lower our workload and still fit within what they're looking for. Where they might want, the expertly edited video to go along with their audio podcast, maybe now we don't expertly edit the video. We do what I call a video light option. It's something I offer. It's not, as great. It's better than a Zoom call being thrown up on YouTube. But that greatly reduces the amount of time that I spend on the product. And that might fit in their budget and their time frame.
Right. I'm kind of with you on that, Steve. For existing clients, I typically tell them, let's do the more work and then we will revisit to see if we can lower cost. And I've done that in the past where like, hey, we're expressing a lot of efficiencies here. You and your team are helping me out. So yes, I can lower the cost. With that being said, I don't lower the cost based off their theory that they are going to bring me more work or whatever. Now there's various package levels, and typically with new clients coming in, we don't have that issue, right? Like, hey, you pick this and it's a lower cost per episode, but it's based around more work, or more frequent episodes, or less work for me, more work for your team, whatever it may be. But, they typically find what works in their budget and what works with their flow, but then they want to change that. And kind of what we were saying before goes back to that other thing. So yeah, that happens. And, for me, I typically say, let's do the more work and then revisit, the cost associated with it. But
that fits with my spirit.
Just very quickly as well, there's a bit of a podcasting cognitive bias that clients have with us usually. And it sits in the space that podcast editors, when they do their job well, they seem invisible and the work looks effortless. Like when we do our job well, it looks like we haven't spent a whole lot of time on it, even though we've spent a lot of time on it. So there's a disparity there with how they judge the payment of work as well, I think. It's
like, in fact, Steve, I think you have this t-shirt, podcast editing ninjas, no one knows that we were ever here. If we do their job right, that just, it seems seamless. And everyone sounds like they're uber intelligent on the show when in fact, reality, they may be morons.
and the simple way to prove that to your client is to show them the length of their recording versus the length of the episode. And if you haven't added in a bunch of music or pre-recorded content, they should get a really clear picture right away that, oh, okay, there is something different here because my 40-minute recording is only 30 minutes. That tells them right there that we've done something, and it should be not unnoticeable, invisible, ninja.
Yeah.
Yes, ninja.
I'll throw on these next two red flags together because it sounds like they're a good transition from what we're talking about here. The first one is, I don't want you to track your hours because I don't know how long you'll work. It brings up to the point you were saying, Matthew, is like, it sounds great. They don't realize how much work goes into it. And the next one, it's just a 2-hour podcast when in fact it's 2.5 hours. Yeah. So.
And the multiplicative addition of editing time depending on skill and all that kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah. I find in like an hour-long show or half-hour-long show, whatever, about 25% can easily be, well, not easily be cut out. 25% can be cut out and enhance the episode. That 25% takes 4 times as long as the episode itself to actually find, identify, cut it out, and make it seamless. Did I say that correctly? Okay, Steve is clapping. So I was trying to think, what do I mean by that? But yeah, about 25% or more. It's finding that cumulative 25% to cut out to make the show actually better. But gosh, that does take a lot of work.
Yeah, well, I can comment on that. It's easy because even if I don't have the authority to take out content, meaning, this shouldn't be used on the show, it's just crutches and stuff like that, the reduction of the podcast, the original recordings, is always between 12 and 18%, almost always. Well, there's getting closer to 25 right there, Mark. But if the client simply makes the decision, usually with interviews, to take out the weakest question and answer, well, there's another 5 to 10% of the interview right there. And that does make the episode even more potent because now you've just created more clarity, more value, and it gets less boring because you've taken out the least powerful question answer point. So 25% is not a surprise to me.
It's not a lot. And do the clients actually value that, they gave you a 45-minute recording and you're returning a 30-minute episode? That's even more than 25%, but do they really value the amount of work it took to find, identify, and cut out that 15 minutes? And then how good that 30 minutes sounds? Because a podcast is like a piece of string, as many people say, right? It just needs to be as long as it needs to be. It's not like you need to worry about cutting to commercials. That's about it as far as the red flags I found on Podcast Editors Club. I'm sure there's many, many more, but I only had a few written down. Anything else to add, guys?
Always think about the cognitive biases that come into play with you and your clients. Sunk cost fallacy, Parkinson's law. There's plenty more. Look them up. And it's the only way to prepare.
Wait, go into cognitive bias. Tell us what that is.
Well, a cognitive bias is something psychologically that you experience when you're approaching a certain thing. There's plenty of cognitive biases that have been recognized but it's something that affects the way you make a decision about a particular thing. So the sunk cost fallacy, I've been doing this podcast for 10 years, 600 episodes in. I can't stop it now. They're expecting me. I have to keep going. When in reality, a branding shift, a new podcast, a name change, all of that would be the best decision for your show. Parkinson's law, I think, is your work will expand to fill the time that you allocate to it. Linking back to our
Time or
ASAP
resources
versus due date thing, expand to fill the time in it. There's so many more. There's one about people who know so little but feel like they're experts. Those cognitive biases are a really good thing to research and keep in mind. And anything cognitive, really. Decision fatigue, cognitive load. There are a lot of fun things to explore.
So when we see these red flags, what are we supposed to do? Run away, run away, run away? How do we resolve red flags? Because we're the ones perceiving them as red flags, even though they might really be red flags. I mean, if you were to sum it up, what are some of those things that we mentioned a bunch? How do you handle it?
Well, realistically, you have to be resolute and back yourself in the common parlance. Realistically, making a decision about how you approach a client when you see one of these red flags and understanding the decision that you're going to make, and make sure that you are clear with them about how you approach it. And giving yourself grace too. The first time it happens, it's always hard, but that's why having the podcast editors community available to you for this kind of thing, it's why it's a benefit to us.
Respect yourself, work with clients that respect you and the value that you bring. And if you need a shoulder to cry on, post anonymously in the Podcast Editors Club of Red Flags, because there will be many, many people that will commiserate with you and say, hey, it's a lesson we all learn once. The key thing is not to make the same mistake twice. Matthew Bliss, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Podcast Editors Mastermind. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's been great.